Hello again, it's Ken Goodevenness with Kenny's Carrots, number 38. Again, we continue to quote passages from Christopher Watkins' book, Biblical Critical Theory, a great volume that you need to get your hands on. We continue to talk today about contract versus covenant. And in particular, we're going to look at the idea of equivalence in a contract versus superabundance in a covenant. Equivalence versus superabundance. Contract versus covenant. Let's see what Christopher Watkins has to say. When we look at the nature of modern contracts and God's covenants with his people, we see some striking differences. God's covenants institute binding relationships, and contracts are a convenient agreement. First, a contract is governed by calculation and reciprocal benefit and can be broken if the penalty for doing so becomes less than the cost of honoring it, or if a party reneges on his or her commitment. God's covenant with his people, by contrast, are irrevocably binding and do not play out on a balance sheet of credit and debit. Second, in a contract, the relationship between the parties is conditioned and limited by their commitment to each other as described in the contract's terms. In God's covenants, the obligations flow from the relationship and not its full extent, and are not its full extent. In other words, the obligations are not the full extent of the covenant. The goal of covenant instead is intimacy, friendship, communion, the richest of interpersonal relationships in which persons are persons to the full, as if they are in communion with each other. Esther Meek summarizes this uncontractional dynamic in the following way. She writes, "Law, so prominent in Scripture, is not to be understood as creating relationship. Rather, law nourishes relationship. Contracts obey a logic of equivalence, a regime of strict justice in which unerring calculation determines the just measure of commitment in each case. It is the logic of the transaction and of the market, a reciprocal paradigm in which debts must be paid in full, but no more. The logic of equivalence belongs to a view of the world in which every gift is a Trojan horse that requires reciprocation sooner or later. God's covenants, by contrast, operate according to a logic of superabundance, a lavish, gracious, loving paradigm of excess. The closest human equivalent to the logic of superabundance in Genesis 12 and Genesis 15 is perhaps a wedding vow. The happy and happily naive couple make wild, limitless commitments that bind them in radical and long-lasting ways. No couple knows what they are in for as they make their wedding vows. They're not supposed to know. Covenants are based on commitment, not on calculation and prenuptial agreements. Humanly speaking, if you know what you're getting yourself into, you are entering a contract. You set limits on the commitment. You perform a cost-benefit analysis in advance. You calculate. But Abram has no opportunity to perform a cost-benefit analysis in advance. He does not know what he's getting himself into. He does not calculate. All he knows is that God has spoken to him and made spectacular promises, and that is enough. As for God, he commits to bless Abram and his descendants while knowing full well about Abram's future disobedience and about the stubbornness, idolatry, and inveterate grumbling of Abram's descendants. This is why covenant is part of the overarching biblical figure of gratuity. It is not a marker transaction, but a superabundant gift. In a human contract, I put on the table an agreed upon portfolio of money, goods, and services, and I expect a reciprocal agreed upon package in return. In a covenant, by contrast, I put myself on the table, committing for better and worse, richer and poorer. There you have it. Contract versus covenant. I'm glad I'm in a covenant with God and not a contract. How about you? If you like what you're seeing here, please indicate so on the page that you're watching it on. And also do subscribe to our YouTube channel, Digging for Scriptural Gems. Till next time.